the Political Free Agents, and we're back here for our Sunday episode. Looking forward to this one. Today is just going to be me and CG. Mike had some other things he had to take care of today. What's going on, CG? It looks like you're muted, CG. Technical difficulties off the bat. All right,
that's my fault. I'm driving right now, man. I've been in 100-degree heat since about 9 o'clock this morning, 9:30 this morning, watching Lauren play softball, man. So my brain ain't functioning at top tier right now.
I hear that. But you gotta be out there to support my number one softball player. That's my MVP
been awesome,
right
man.
there.
La did. She's been playing some of the best third base I've ever seen her play, man, and it's been amazing to see. She's a natural second baseman, John. It's one of the things that I always tell folks. I mean, because she's really rangy and she's fast and she has good feet and a good glove. But man, watching her play third base, man, she shut that corner off.
Nice. That's awesome, man. Yeah, and they're so actually, you know what? Let's sidebar this real quick because we've had this conversation privately, and we haven't talked because of everything that's been going on. We haven't really dug into the COVID stuff and reopening and those sort of things. We talked about, like, how do you actually do this? How do we actually get back to the point to where things are happening, things are live, that sort of thing. So John has a similar thing with what he's doing in School of Rock. But real quick, Chris, for what we've been talking about, what's the way that we can actually reopen all of these activities, the economy, all of these sort of things? What was your thoughts on that? Let's expound on that real quick.
I'm going to be quite honest with you. At the softball field, there's no social distancing. I mean, the kids are protected, because softball, baseball is just kind of a naturally socially distanced sport because they are, they're spread around the field. But those girls come in the same dugout with each other. It really does come down to hygiene. The girls after the game aren't, they aren't going through and they aren't shaking hands with each other after the game, good game, and all that other stuff. Once the game's over, it's over. They go to their respective dugouts, and that's that. But in the stands, parents-wise, I mean, you try to figure out a way to not shake each other's hands and, not share foods and whatnot because it's natural. I mean, we've all been around each other for years. You know what I mean? So it's a natural thing for us to hug and shake hands. I saw an umpire today that came out that I haven't seen in probably 3 years, man. And he came up to me and just naturally I shook his hand, I think, to be honest with you, John, the biggest part of it is I think it kind of works like consumer confidence in a way. Individuals have to get out there. They have to be around crowds. They have to be around each other. They've got to be around it enough and come home to know that they're safe, know that, yes, something may happen, but, at the end of the day, I mean, this is what I'm going at. I'm going out to the softball field in terms of watching my kid. I know I'm going to be around individuals. I need to, use my best practices and things like that. But I'm going to be honest with you, man. I think it's a lot like the consumer confidence, where as it slowly continues to move on, kind of like the economy getting better, right? I mean, individuals are just going to get a lot more comfortable with it, and eventually it's just going to go on and we'll forget about it. But we'll see. I mean, that's my take on it because that's been my life for the past couple of weekends, and it is what it is.
My bad, actually hit mute. I'm so used to being in these meetings, I have the shortcut down. I hit mute by default. That's one of the things that we discussed before as well, that at some point we're going to have to own up to the point that it's our responsibility to protect our family, our kids, and whether or not we want them to be a part of some activity, that's going to be on us. We have to decide that. That's something that we choose, for our family, because we feel like they'll be safe, or, whatever the case may be, we'll keep them safe. And so, when little John was, he's been in School of Rock. I've posted quite a bit of his videos and stuff like that, and he absolutely loves it. they actually been doing online sessions, and it's been very difficult for him, because think about it, you're trying to drum live on a Zoom, and it's difficult to really get in, and I'm pretty sure it's difficult for the teachers to actually hear like, and it's just gotta be difficult.
Boy, if you're not running that through some type of preamp, I bet it's hell.
Oh no, it's just like computer mic and drums in a room of not much, you know, nor really not even say not much, no real sound, acoustic work done to it. It's just his bedroom, so it has like a bed and some things that will absorb some sounds, but there's no treatment or anything. So it's just like, and so the teacher can't really see his hands, his movements, so it's difficult, and John doesn't really care for it. And so whenever they started to open back up, I had to have him sit him down and say, hey, what do you think? What do you think about this, going back to School of Rock, actually in person? And he was like, oh, we can do that. And I was like, well, if you want to, then that's something that we can discuss. And so we decided, yeah, we'll go back. Went up there. When we first get there, the very first thing, they meet him at the door, and then from there, they actually don't allow parents to come in. It's just the kid can come in. They met us at the door and said, hey, we need you to sign this. And it was a
Yep.
waiver that said you take responsibility for the potential of your kid getting sick.
What are your thoughts on
Understanding,
that, John?
like we discussed, that's the only way it can happen, right? Like
100%.
if they take responsibility for it, then they're just setting themselves up for, as you said many times before, such a litigious country. They set themselves up to be sued, and it's our choice to take our kids to these places where they're going to meet in groups. Now, they outlined 100% of what they're doing, who can be in the room, how many people will be there at a time. They've spaced out the number of people, because it used to get a little crowded, and there's maybe 6 or 7 places for them to practice. They talked about like how they wipe down the rooms, they wipe down the drums after. They really outlined these practices that they're doing. The teachers have masks on, all these sort of things. So, I mean, they're doing their part, and it's up to us to determine whether or not we want to put our kids in that situation. And in this case, yeah, I was comfortable with it. I feel like they're doing enough to be able to protect little John. And in that sense,
Yep.
all right, let's try it out. They only had one clause that I was a little miffed about, which was that they will basically tell other people if he catches COVID, they'll tell other people that he has COVID, which is a HIPAA
Him
violation.
specifically?
Yeah, which is a HIPAA violation
Wow.
unless you actually, allow it. And
Absolutely.
and the
Now,
reason why I was okay with that one, hold on one sec. The reason why I was okay with that was if John, because they do groups and they have their band internally. If one of the band members has COVID and we don't know, we just know somebody at School of Rock has COVID. We don't know who the band member is, and they choose, forget it, I'm going anyway. I'm asymptomatic. I don't feel sick. I feel like I would want to know about that.
I see.
Not to treat the kid differently or whatever, but I would want to know at that point. And so I was like,
Yep.
okay. But go ahead. What, you're about to add something?
That was exactly my question. But you know what? Julie had to sign something similar. I didn't see it because Jules actually took him. But Colton is going to like an American Ninja Warrior school on 2 days a week, and he absolutely loves it. But it's the same thing. Parents have to stay outside. We can't go in. We can't, can't bring them food inside. And once they're inside, they just completely lock us out. And, again, it's kind of for their own safety. And I think, I don't know if you guys have got the survey yet out there in your school district, But, in our school district, we got the survey as to what would you prefer? Would you prefer stay-at-home schooling, or would you prefer 1 week at school, 1 week learning at home? And then basically what we do is we have two sets of kids and we flip them in and out. And I was like, God dang, man, I don't know the answer to that. I mean,
yeah, that's
what is the right thing to do? You know what I mean? So, and everyone's doing that.
Yeah,
everyone's doing that.
I was talking to a nephew, Easy, about what's going on with them in terms of getting ready for football next year, and what they're doing with that. And so, like, it's no one really has an answer right now, and it's one of those things of play by ear. So our family reunion actually is normally the first weekend in July, and
Yep.
we haven't, if any family's listening now, welcome to the information. We haven't posted this anywhere, but we decided that, we have to postpone this because we don't know 30 days out what's going to happen. We just don't know. Like, are the cases going to spike? Is it, under control? Did we, address the curve, flatten it, or what was the case? We don't know. So it's like, well, we need to postpone.
All right.
This,
so that means Corey. That means Corey can't cheat on his brisket this year.
Hey, he already was looking for a place to buy a brisket and bring it down.
Was he?
Nah, I just hope he's listening so he ends up saying so. As long as he don't bring any of those burnt ribs down anymore, I'm good.
Man, that's you got water. I'm dying, man.
The audio went out a little bit. Can't really hear you there.
I said, I'm trying to grab a water real quick, man. My dang, can you hear me better now?
Yep, I can hear you.
John, I said, I've been in the seat all day long, man. I'm dying.
I hear you. That's cool. I'll talk to the people real quick for a minute while you go ahead and handle that.
Yeah, go ahead.
And give them a quick update. All right, so the title of this episode was "The Revolution is Being Televised," and the specific point of that is a throwback to Gil Scott-Heron, who had the, I guess you could say, the poem about the revolution. And I'm just going to read the first part of it. It says, "You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out on beer for beer during commercials, because the revolution will not be televised." And he goes on. And the point, back then, obviously, it wouldn't be televised. But the interesting part is that the reason this revolution that we're seeing happen right now is as big as it is because it is being televised. And that's kind of the point of the discussion, is that these things are being televised, and that's why it's such a big deal. And we have this conversation quite a bit whenever we talk about Candace Owens a lot, or not a lot, but like whenever we discuss Candace Owens, we talk about the point of the fact of the problem with the position that someone like her takes and others is that they focus on black on black crime, and they focus on these other nonsensical things that don't relate to the thing currently at hand. And the reason they do that is to deflect focus. The same thing with the all lives matter sort of thing. But the point of this entire thing is that because it's being televised, it's actually hitting differently now. And so people are actually seeing things. It's not just the point of someone hearing about, the number of people shot in Chicago, which is what they love to come up with, in a response. It's not about just hearing. If you actually saw it, it changes everything. So the fact that we're actually seeing these things happen, we're actually seeing people being killed, that changes the narrative completely. So what's happening right now is purely because we can see it. And to be honest with you, Chris, you were actually having a really good conversation on Facebook, and it kind of talked about the idea of the no knock warrants and the no knock warrant aspect of what happened with Breonna Taylor. Truly and really should have been something that sparked this sort of revolution. But what happened was seeing George Floyd on video being murdered, and the way that it happened, it sparked all of this. Now, Breonna Taylor, if you're not familiar, was the one who was just sitting in her house with her boyfriend, and they just came in and they just started shooting. The boyfriend shot back, and they tried to arrest him, but they ended up killing her. And they actually had the wrong house. If that's not egregious enough to start a revolution, I'm not sure what really would be, right? Because that in and of itself is not, it's not a focus on Black lives, it's a focus on police brutality, and that right there is going way too far, right? So the fact that things are being televised right now, that's the point of why all of this is happening right now. And many people, CG, they're not getting that point. They want to talk about all these other things that are happening, but they're not getting the point that you saw this, you see this thing happening. But I heard one of the lawyers from the OJ case, he was an up and coming lawyer. He was actually on the Bomani Jones podcast this week. And he was talking about, he made a statement. He said, police brutality is not getting worse. It's just getting televised.
Absolutely.
And that's really what sparked the name of this episode, because he's absolutely right. It's being recorded now. This is nothing new. We've seen this. We've known this. People in Black communities, or let's say specifically in poor communities, they're used to police acting like this. So the fact that it's being televised is what's changing the game. And so I'm interested, CG, and where do you see this actually going? The fact that it is being televised and that's what's changing it. Do you see a concerted effort in us trying to get to some point where more of it is available on video? I know I brought it up before where Obama did the whole the cams they put on, but then they were able to like flip them off or like turn their body a certain way so it wasn't recording. There were like little things they could do to kind of get around that. The farthest level you can go, or furthest level, is a surveillance state, which I don't think any of us want. So where do you think this kind of goes from this point?
You know, John, well, let me tell you something. Where'd you pull your this revolution will not be televised quote from?
Gil Scott-Heron.
Everybody should listen to Gil Scott-Heron. That's the one thing that I'm going to tell all of you. He is. I remember when I first logged on to Facebook. Like when I first started Facebook, he was my second profile picture outside of ODB. And if you listen to him, just remember that he's a product of the.
Lost your audio there. You went on mute, Chris. Hold on. There you go. You're back.
You're good. I said everyone should listen to Gil Scott-Heron, man, because you'll just remember that a lot of his stuff is a product of that kind of 50s and 60s and 70s era where you saw a lot of injustice that eventually led to civil rights in the 60s, but his music is absolutely incredible. I don't know how many albums by him, but it's the one thing that I will absolutely say, man, go back and listen to some of his stuff because Gil Scott-Heron is incredible. He was truly a voice, man. He died not too long ago, but he's phenomenal, man. He's one of my favorites ever. So kind of launching a springboard off of that, I was having that conversation and Chris McMahon, by the way, if you're listening, man, I love you, brother. I don't know how many people know this, but me and Chris McMahon were each other's first friends back in Refugio. I think we had the first sleepover at each other's house. His grandparents, and I tell him all the time, were two truly special people, man. Mr. and Mrs. Little were cut from a different cloth, and they were phenomenal individuals. So it's not surprising that Chris is the way he is and become a great family man, because he was raised by some of the best. So, you know, in kind of saying that, you know, in that conversation that he and I were having, I got to thinking about a point I made, and it was, you know, I had made it, John, when the beginning of this thing happened, and I said, I'm curious as to the back dynamic of this and what's going to happen with voter rolls and things like that, because you could kind of see the moment start to change in terms of, I mean, people have tuned the president out. No one really gives a damn what he says anymore outside of a certain subset of voters who are always going to be there. But everyone underneath that boomer base has completely tuned him out. This election is over with. It's not a matter of by if, it's just a matter of how many votes he's going to lose by. And, you know, I think you're going to see all these individuals get out there. And what I'm curious about is how they harness this, because they have now found their cause. As maligned they have been over the years, you know, Generation Z, Generation X, they're lazy. They don't want to work. They don't want to do this. They don't want to do that. You know, they come in demanding the world. And it turns out that they were absolutely onto something. What they know is their work, and they know how to use technology to not only make money, but how to expose things. I mean, I'm always shocked when I get on Twitter how I see a video of someone that may have said something, whether it be racial, or they may have done something, they may have started a fight, or they may have stolen something, and Twitter finds out who that person is in the matter of about 20 minutes. Sometimes it doesn't even take that long. So what they realize is they realize how to harness technology to expose injustices, and there's a power behind that, because they are now figuring out that they can use that as a cause to springboard on. And man, I don't know if you've just seen how many people have been around the world and how many are protesting this thing. This is really, really young. It's really, really diverse. There are a lot of white folks. I mean, there was 200 plus people, I think, in Vidor, Texas, which, if any of you are listening know what happened in Vidor, Texas. The fact that individuals were marching there, I don't think it's a question as to whether or not change is coming. It's coming. Whether anybody likes it or not, it's coming. And they are going to harness that. And they are going to now, I think, vote for the individuals that they want to vote for. And they are going to render this older generation somewhat moot. You know, you see Trump keep getting on Twitter, and he's like, silent majority, silent majority, silent majority. It ain't going to matter, John. So I definitely think that they're going to springboard this, and they are going to come out in mass, and they are going to vote. These protests have been going on now for what, almost a week and a half, something like that.
I think we're looking at 2 weeks here. Yeah, and I think
that's a long time.
Yeah,
that's a long time for individuals to be in the street, brother.
Yeah, if we had the election today, I think it will be a massive landslide. I think there's still so much time available between now and November for the Democrats to screw this up that I think,
that's true too.
I think there's still, I don't think it's necessarily able to be called right now, but in our pre-show, we were talking about this, and you asked me to look it up. Here's what the voter block is looking like. And this is from Pew Research. So the boomers are 28% of the voter block, the eligible voter block. And boomer is 1946 to 64. The millennial is 81 to 96, and that's 27%. You couple the millennial with Gen X, which is 65 to 80, that's 25%. So right there, we're looking at 52% of the voter block was born after 1965, the relevant year of civil rights. Yep. And Gen Z, which is born after 96 and is eligible to vote, is now 10%, which that's overlapped anybody that was born before 1946, which is 9% now. So basically 62% of the voter block was born after 1965, which is pretty relevant. It's pretty relevant in terms of voting. This is definitely a change. If you take just millennial and Gen Z, that's 37% of the voting block, which is the younger voting block, which, as we know, younger people tend to be more liberal than older
Yep.
people, who are more conservative. So, this is going to be interesting to see how that actually plays out in this election. It's going to be very interesting.
It it is going to be one of those things that, I mean, if there's anything that this country has done, it's reduced every citizen into a data subset of some sort. And there's individuals that's all they do is they look at data and figure out how to extrapolate it and make it work to their cause. And I guarantee you right now, if the Biden demographic, Biden needs to do two things if he wants to have a chance to win. Because right now, when I think of Joe Biden, I think of Barack Obama. That's his relevancy to me because that's what he was tied to in terms of quote unquote change, right? Mm-hmm. That's what he's tied to me. So me voting for him, I'm not overly excited about it, to be honest with you, because I see him as another just flat out old white politician. And that's the conundrum that the reason I say that is because mindset as well. How do you get that entire subset of a voting base to not look at him the exact same way? He's now been forced, and I think with this George Floyd thing, he's now been forced into a situation where he's going to have to pick a running mate that's black. He's probably going to have to pick a running mate that's a female, which narrows it down to probably Susan Rice and Stacey Abrams, in my opinion. And then I think he's going to have to get extremely, extremely young on the campaign side to figure out how to relate to a lot of these young voters. Because if not, they're going to look at it and say, we'll wait another 4 years. That's very highly possible, man. Now, the flip side of that is there may be enough minorities come out and vote to where they can hedge that, and they have a landslide anyway. Because I think, like I said, I was, in that conversation that I was having with Chris, it hit me, and I said, you know what? I can't think of another time in my lifetime, or even in my parents' lifetime, when the country has basically just, the presidency has rendered itself moot, John. There's literally nothing of value coming out of it. You know what I mean? There's nothing of value coming from the office of the presidency. And there's nothing of value coming from everyone underneath that either. He tried to parade his daughter out to come put out some type of propagandic video, and it was very, very, very odd to me, to be honest with you. It was just weird. So, I think that the dynamic at play here is if they don't harness one, they're going to have to harness the other. And I think older age minorities who have been in the system for a long time and have seen this are probably going to come out and support because they want true change. But I think that they're going to have to figure out a way to harness that younger voting base, because if they don't, they could, like you said, they could screw it up.
Yeah, and I think the numbers have shown, and this. So what Trump did was absolutely an interesting flip in the last 4 days of the last election. But had the FBI not did what they did that last Friday, which left everybody thinking about Hillary being guilty for 4 days, I think he still loses. But even to that point, I think what happened was largely people just didn't show up. We saw a record low turnout. And that always benefits conservatives. Historically, even in midterm elections, that benefits conservatives. And so,
but they had the numbers, John. They had the numbers with Bernie Sanders. They had the numbers.
Oh yeah, I definitely.
That's exactly why I'm talking about this scenario now, to where they just look at it and say, "Screw it, we'll stay home." Because
that's what happened in 2016.
When they ousted Elizabeth Warren, when they ousted Bernie Sanders, and granted, this process was a little bit different this time, and they all gravitated to Joe Biden, that conversation struck up again. But I now think that they have found, between civil rights, gun control, and, wanting to make essentially environmentalism one of their forefront, they now have three things that they can look at and they can make a focus of their generation, and they're gonna do it. I mean, it's not a question of if, they're gonna do it. And I think that they have now found they have now found the causes that they can truly unite behind. And I think civil rights is at the front of that. And they are going to change things. I mean, I'll tell you a story, and it's interesting. And, you know, I remember, and they always say this is the most multicultural generation ever. And it is. They've been exposed to so much. They can get a hold. They're able to communicate with so many different dynamics of ethnicities and race and colors, etc.
Hold on. Let me give you a stat real quick, just to backstop what you're saying right there. From that same Pew Research, it says the number of non-white and foreign-born shares of the electorate are rising. This is the percent of eligible voters who are non-white. In 2000, it was 24%. 2020 is 34%. So it's a 9% rise in the last 20 years on the voter block. And you can see there was in like 08, it kind of took a tick up and started rising a little bit higher. So to your point, yes, the voter block is changing. It is definitely a more multicultural voter block at this point.
I'm going to tell you when I realized Lauren was at a softball tournament. Actually, I'll tell this story because I like it better than the other one. But Lauren was at a softball tournament, and one of her teammates had a sister who was playing on another team in one of the older brackets. And after they got done, Lauren and this little girl went to watch her sister. And she said, "Lauren, don't make fun of my sister because she's a different color." And Lauren was like, "Okay, all right." So they get out there, and they're watching the softball game. And this little girl's sister is mixed. She's half Hispanic, half black, but she looks more black than Hispanic. Lauren's watching the game, and she says, "Bella, why would I make fun of your sister because she has different socks on?" And I was like, what are you talking about? And then I looked, and it hit me, and I was like, she really has no idea what she was referencing. The girl had red socks on, the rest of the team had white socks on. She had no idea whatsoever. Right. The neighbor down the street, you remember Anthony and Eileen. Yep. Anthony was, you know, Aiden and Elena's father. They're mixed kids. The two older kids are full Hispanic. One day, me and Lauren were walking down the street, and the girls were walking out with suitcases. Lauren says, "Where y'all going?" And they said, "Oh, we're going to Cuero to go see our dad." And Lauren said, "But your dad's right there. Mr. Anthony's right there." And she said, "No, Lauren, we have different fathers." And she had no idea. And I think that's how they process things. They truly do not realize that any of these kids are different from them because it's not a focal point of most of us. You know what I mean? And you know my household, John. My household is very, very diverse in terms of what we bring the kids around.
I think you have more black friends than I do.
It's amazing to see that, man. But, you know, Lauren's aunt is Muslim. I mean, she's an immigrant. It just, you know, all of those things truly matter. And, you know, when we expose children to that, they truly realize that there's no difference. It just is amazing to me, man. I always tell this story. Jules and I were in London one time, and we had a dinner at this restaurant, and there were 12 of us there. There were 6 couples. Julie and I were the only Americans, and everyone else was from another country in some part of the world. They all spoke in different languages, and it was just sitting at that table that night just made me realize, I was like, man, we truly all come from the exact same thing. Our experience are shared to some degree exactly identical. There is really almost nothing that differentiates us outside of, you know, the small things. And it was mind blowing to me, man, and most people won't get that opportunity or don't get that opportunity, but our kids have that opportunity. And I'm telling you right now, John, looking at these protests and seeing how racially diverse it is and how mixed it is, it's going to change, man. I mean, the time is here. The time is here. And your response, you know, to individuals like Candace Owens, I always made the comment to Mike that nobody should listen to Candace Owens because Candace Owens, I don't think half the time even believes herself. But she had a video the other day that I shouldn't have listened to, but I listened to it anyway, where she was talking about George Floyd. And she could not help herself but to attack his character.
Yep, I just saw a tweet from the same thing. Yep.
and she was talking about, well, I don't want to hear this, that he got his life together and he moved, and I don't want to hear that he was this good person because he had been in prison. Who gives a damn? Does that really matter? The dude was being investigated for a possible fake $20 bill and got killed on camera. I mean, what's the relevance of that? There is no relevance of it outside of pandering to an individual-based subset who that stuff matters to, and they are middle-aged to older white voters that care about those things. Everything that comes under that, they don't care about it. It's sad to say, but that's the fact, and that's where she's pigeonholed herself into. You and Mike have had these conversations a long, long time, and that's where she's pigeonholed herself into. I don't know that she will ever learn. Mike said that she's shown the capacity to do it. I don't. Even if she were to change, why would I really want to hear from her, knowing what she built that base on? And it's one of the things that Stephen Jackson flew up there and Bun B flew up there, and they asked Stephen Jackson, "Why are you here?" And the first word out of Stephen Jackson's mouth were, "I'm here so they cannot," and you may have to censor it, but I think his exact words were, "come with that bullshit and try to slander my brother because of his past." I think those were the direct words out of his mouth. And right there,
we knew that point was coming. Yeah, we knew it was coming.
He got out ahead of it. He controlled the message. Have you heard about it much at all from people like Candace Owens? But outside of that, it has not been the media narrative. Even the coroner, I think, tried to come out and lie about it and say something like, well, he had COVID-19 and he had methamphetamine and he had fentanyl in the system. I mean, who cares? Does it matter? The dude was killed on camera. So I think they've gotten in front of that and they've changed that entire narrative to where the benefit of the doubt for police has been taken out, and it's now been unquestionably put out in front of everybody to what's happened. Change is coming, John. Anyone can disagree. Change is coming.
And this is the problem that I have with it all, is that people want to say that the left is race baiting because they're using, police against black folk sort of thing. And on the right, they're doing the same thing. They're race baiting by saying, well, it's not as big a deal because who was it? Ben Carson came out and said like 0.0017% of black people are killed by cops or something like that. And they're starting a new movement called All Black Lives Matter to deal with black on black crime as well. And it's like the point that we've been trying to focus on, the point that we've been trying to clarify here is that this is the state. This is the government of the United States killing citizens. The rest of it is irrelevant. I don't care what the person was doing, what they had on, what they had on in their past. Their arrest record does not matter. It doesn't matter. If the police are unceremoniously just killing people, that is a problem for Americans. But they want to focus on it being a race bait thing from the left because he was black. Okay. So we're seeing, like, in this movement, like, there is a huge swath of people who largely are not black, who are behind this. And this is why I keep posting the same exact message, is that this one is hitting differently. It's just hitting differently. There's actually, you know what, I'll put it in the show notes as well, and I'll put it in the chat. And welcome to all of our viewers who are watching on YouTube. I see you out there. So there's actually a video of a woman who survived. She was an Auschwitz survivor, and she drove up to the Black Lives Matter protest. It says at the corner of Roosevelt and Washington, and you can see her number tattooed on her arm, right? And she said, "They're all SOBs. You should see what they did to my brother." And so, like, the idea of a nation that disproportionately kills people, like, just as a government, police in America disproportionately kill people compared to pretty much every other country. For some reason, they want to focus on the one thing that is irrelevant, and that's the race of the individual. people need to realize the government is outright killing people. And I'm old enough to remember when Obama sent some drones and there were 3 American citizens who were killed, who were suspected terrorists, and the right blew their freaking lid because the government killed some American citizens. Rightfully so. But they should be doing this here as well. They should be flipping their lid. There's a story I heard about from a gentleman who was in San Diego, in Chula Vista, actually. And the Chula Vista police were called. This was a couple months ago. The Chula Vista police were called because there was, something was going on with him wanting to jump out of a window. I think he was having, a mental issue at that moment. The cops get there and the cops kill the man.
Yep.
You haven't heard about it. His name is Nunes, Nunis. He's a Jamaican man, but you haven't heard about it. And this is the point: the name Oro Nunes means nothing to the majority of America because they haven't heard it. And why? Because there is no video, because it is not being televised. So these sort of things happen so often that even in the sense of an old man in Buffalo, 75-year-old man, gets pushed down by the cops, starts bleeding, and then the cops come out with the with the report of the day and says, one man was injured, he slipped and fell. He slipped and fell, but we have actual video showing this man was pushed down by the cops, hit his head on the ground, and blood was immediately leaking out of his head. But we're supposed to just believe from that police report he slipped and fell. And then they just left him laying there while, the other cops go and try to, subdue another individual who was protesting. And so the point of this is that if there was no video of that man being pushed down and leaking from his head, we would not have seen what happened. We would not have been able to call foul on the situation that was going on. And we would not have known that the cops actually pushed down this nonviolent 75-year-old man. So the revolution absolutely is being televised. We're seeing it across the world. We're seeing, it happen in multiple countries. We saw the U.S. embassy. I can't remember. I don't think it was Tel Aviv, but somewhere the U.S. embassy was getting firebombed because of their support, quote unquote.
I think it was Istanbul or something like that.
It may have been, but we've seen that. We've seen protests happening in countries where they're laying down across bridges and hands behind their back saying "I can't breathe." Like we're seeing it in places where it's largely white country or white parts of America that you don't see any bit of color, where they're doing the same thing. And the protests are happening across racial lines, which is beautiful for me, which is why I was drinking my coffee today out of my mug that says "Teach love,
absolutely, brother,
not race," because the point of the focus, and those who focus on it on both sides of the spectrum, are getting it wrong when they focus on the specific race of the individual. We know that there's a disproportionate effective force from police on the Black community, largely because that disproportionate amount of force that's applied is happening in the poor community. Because why? They don't have judges that they can just call up and say, "Hey man, my son, he got harassed," whatever. They're also not the judges. They're not the lawyers. They're not the doctors. They're not professionals in certain industries that can get the respect easily. They're coming to court with common clothes on. Maybe they're baggy. Maybe they're, maybe they look okay, but they're not coming to court presenting themselves as a high class professional. So it's a classism sort of thing. And that's what people need to understand, is that the Black community is in a position where it cannot defend itself in large because of the disproportionate amount of wealth. And that's where I think things have to change, Chris. And I was interested because I should have shared it with you, but I watched a fair amount of videos yesterday, just from, the 60s, specifically James Baldwin. I watched one from him in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, and also watched one from Dr. Claude Anderson. I'm not sure if you know him. He wrote the book Powernomics. He had an interview. I didn't finish it yet on the Breakfast Club. And I think the part of this revolution that has to happen is we have to change the financial structure in this country. We're not going to eradicate poverty. We're just simply not. You're always like yin and yang. You're going to have rich, you're going to have poor. Always are. That's just the nature of the way math works. So for every positive is going to be a negative. But I think we have to raise those that are in poverty out of poverty. What do you think about that, Chris?
First off, you were running Dick Cavett, weren't you? Because I saw your post.
I did. And, I watched some Dick Cavett as well.
Man, I made a mistake and I should have done it and I didn't do it and I went against my better judgment. But NPR was running this thumb, and I went back and looked for it the other day. I couldn't find it, but they had a thumb drive that they were selling for like $200, and they were trying to raise money for something. But I think it had something like 500 speeches on it from individuals all around the world talking about different kind of injustices and things like that. And I used to sit down and listen to NPR when they would air those speeches, man, and they just were mind blowing, because you realize that, not only were these individuals articulate, but golly, man, the way that they saw things even then and saw where we were going if this wasn't going to be addressed. That's why they say, man, this guy was truly ahead of his time, because Baldwin's is incredible, man.
Absolutely.
I sit there and listen to some of the things that he say, and not so much as a fan, but just more so as trying to learn something from it. And it's like, golly, man, this is absolutely incredible. Is that when you watch those things and you go back and you look at those Dick Cavett shows? There's such a contrast from the 60s to now and what they were fighting for, because they're still fighting for not only the exact same things, but you could have individuals come together. And, I saw that post where you compared Tuke to Jim Brown, and they absolutely look the same. But
they,
oh my Lord, man. But you saw the one thing that those individuals were truly afraid of when they got on those nationally syndicated talk shows were well-educated, good-looking black men who could get up there and articulate their positions and never lose their cool about anything. And it's why,
yep.
I've always long said that when you look at minorities, specifically the black community, and you look at how their leaders are attacked, it escalates so fast, right? There's no middle ground with it, because they're trying to take them out of that pocket of that long-standing faith-based and that long-standing, inherited ability. Even you, John, like I always tell people, John Bland and Willis Stewart are the two individuals that I don't think I have ever seen get out of character in my life. Like, it doesn't happen. Willis is the same way. I've never seen him angry, ever. And it's so confrontational now that that's part of the narrative, right? That the angry black man, look at him, the angry black man. It's part of the narrative. But going back and looking at those shows, they realized, people like Ali, people like Jim Brown, they could never truly take them out of that character, because they could articulate their position so well that it scared the hell out of them to know that they could drive change. And I think that's why they've always tried to suppress it. And the one thing that I guarantee you changes it right now, more so even on the financial structure, John, is it being multicultural. Because again, man,
absolutely.
Like I said, if you see this thing happening in places like Vidor, Texas, it's coming.
It was in the RGV. You saw the guy with the chainsaw down in McAllen?
I did. And
that was in response to a Black Lives Matter protest in McAllen. Like the RGV is starting to see protests. Like, It's hitting differently.
And those older Hispanics are some of the worst, man. I mean, they can be extremely, extremely diverse. Some of them have been open and accepting to multiculturalism. You know, in places like Refugio, most of them have had interracial marriages or kids in their families. But when you get further down into the RGV, like, I mean, man, they don't even like immigrants, Mexican immigrants.
And for those that don't know, actually, since we're speaking Texas right now, that's the Rio Grande Valley.
Yes.
The south part of Texas.
But man, dude, hey man, all I'm gonna say is that it's beautiful to see. It's beautiful to see this coming, and you know, we have to do our job, and we have to continue to talk about it and continue to drive it. I mean, it's up to us to get it out there to the younger generation, envelope in whoever we can, you know, get different individuals on the show, even if they don't agree with all of our points of views, because I've long said, you know, the only way to be able to push through this thing is to have the conversations about it. And now everyone is having the conversation about these things, and we
Absolutely.
are, I wouldn't say ahead of the game, but you know, I think all of us, especially you and Mike, and myself, I know that we all are able to strip back an issue and take our biases out of it completely, and not only look at the why, but also the what and the how behind it. And I think the majority of the country is having a rude wake-up call and figure out we all need to do this, because it's the only way that we drive change forward. I think too, you know, when you look at the way history is taught, because the state of Texas, they develop the curriculum in terms of history books, and that sets kind of the national standard. But, you know, you've had the Julio Cesar Chavez's, you've had the MLKs reduced to, if not footnotes, completely taken out, you know, so they don't know about Mexican farm labor movements. They don't know that MLK was extremely radical, and they've been reduced down to things like the "I Have a Dream" speech. And the "I Have a Dream" speech was great. Don't get me wrong, but he had so many speeches that speech pales in comparison to his Vietnam speech, when he talked about exactly that. Not only what you were getting, that's why I've brought it to this point. He talked about the divide of not only the wealth inequality, but the policing and justice inequality in those, you know, in the African American community. And if you look at it, you know, you look at people like Nixon, who that was the wedge that they drove. They drove that wedge of painting the narrative of, well, leftists are anti-war, they are anti-white, and they started to paint this picture that blacks were all radicals, and you know, they don't support our causes. Reagan put that on steroids, and here we are. This is all a product of, you know, of the change that they seek to drive, and they flowed the money up to the top. That's by no accident. I mean, private prisons have swelled. Every single one of us know one or multiple individuals that have gone to jail, that have served long periods of time. John, you and I were talking about one of our good friends the other day that got a raw deal, you know, who's now home, and it's good to see. But that inequality is now being questioned. I think whether or not anything is done immediately about it, I don't know, but I think we have to drive true reform, and we have to be able to implement that. I mean, you look at, you know, I don't know how many individuals have been to inner cities in places like Houston, but you go to Sunnyside, you go to Third Ward, you go to South Park. Those businesses aren't black-owned businesses.
Oh.
They're Asian-owned businesses. Every single one of them is Asian-owned businesses. You look at that, you know, you look at, what was it? Don't Be a Menace, that scene with O-Dog when they're in there and he's getting the 40 ounce, and he basically accuses him of stealing and then says, "I feel sorry for your mother." That is a dynamic inside of that community that really exists. Those businesses were Black-owned businesses. I guarantee you that the dynamic in terms of how the Black community spends its dollar and how they value it and how they would support it would be completely different. South Chicago, the exact same thing. They absolutely have nothing. If you look at the dynamic of South Chicago and what happened when they when they tore down Cabrini Green and then started moving individuals to certain certain parts of Chicago, there was no economic opportunity there for them, but the stipends that they gave them were even worse. That it was all systematic to some extent. And even then, man, I mean, the Black community in this country, the African American community in this country has pursued, they have survived, they continue to advance. And now that they drive real change, I want to see what comes out of this, man, because I guarantee you in 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, we could be having a completely different conversation about this whole thing.
Absolutely. You know, speaking of Cabrini Green, I was there fall of last year. A good friend of ours were getting married up there. And so we flew in, and we also have good friends up there that we were hanging out with, and they actually took us around, and we were riding, and they were like, "Yeah, this is Cabrini Greens," and I was like, "What?" Completely gentrified. It's a completely different place.
You remember that documentary when we were kids called Hoop Dreams?
Yep. Absolutely.
About the two kids. And so when I got to St. Mary's, we had a dude in there named Damian McIntosh. And Damian McIntosh grew up in the heart of South Chicago. He was good enough in basketball to where he got a scholarship to go to the school, St. Joseph's, that those two kids wanted to go to. He made it there. He was on the team that won the first state title for St. Joe's. And he used to sit there and tell me stories about what it was like having to grow up in that dynamic in South Chicago and then get on the train at 5 o'clock in the morning to ride to be able to get to St. Joseph's and go to school and try to manage his books, try to manage the violence that was around him and things like that. And that's exactly what he told me. He was like, "Man, Isaiah Thomas did so much for us in terms of making sure we had shoes, making sure we had jerseys and things like that, making sure that we could survive, because most of us did not live in Westchester where the school was, man. We all lived in South Chicago. We were there for our talent." And, it gives you a different perspective of, wow, like, this is a real thing, man, that unless it's right there in front of you and you talk to these people, you have no idea how they're being affected. You see it on the news and it's polarized. Well, all they do is kill each other in South Chicago. Well, I mean, how else are you going to survive if you live in an environment to where, it's dog eat dog pretty much. Everyone's been to prison. Mothers and fathers are on drugs. I was watching a documentary one time, I think it was A Last Chance or something like that. And one of the kids was talking about his mother being a crack addict. And he made the comment, and he said, you know what happens to a young man when he grows up and realizes that his mother doesn't love him, that his mother's not there to provide, or that his mother isn't there to protect you. He said, it makes you a killer, because that's what you have to do to live. And I always think back to my dad. My dad grew up really, really poor. I always think back to my dad's comment where he said, "A hungry belly ain't got no guilty conscience, man. Go find a way to eat." And, you look at an entire subsection of a city that, I mean, some of those kids talking, like I was watching an interview one time with Young Chop, who's a producer from South Chicago, and they took him to the Bean. And he said, "Believe it or not, I live 5 miles from downtown. I've never been here to see this before." That gives you a perspective of what that's like, the inequality of what that's like. But I think when I think back to Trump's, one of his first tweets was, I think it was July 4th or something like that, when they had something like 104 people get shot in South Chicago. What did he say? Something like, if the Chicago police or the Chicago politicians can't clean up what's going on in South Chicago, I will, and I will send in the feds or something like that, to that extent. His first inclination wasn't to maybe call or go down there and figure out what was going on. It was to amplify the situation and suppress it, so to speak. All those people would probably be arrested. People would probably be killed. And now we're back to square one. So I don't know, man. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, because we have a dynamic in this country that I don't think we've ever had before, to where you've got a large voting bloc in the boomers that still matters to somewhat extent, but everything that comes underneath that can truly drive real change. We have the office of the presidency that is basically non-existent to moot right now. Everything that comes out of it is propaganda. You got a complicit Senate. The Justice Department is just as complicit. The Supreme Court seems to be teetering. I don't know, what the dynamic of that's going to be and how long that's going to survive. Ginsburg will probably be retire if there's going to be a change in not only the elected officials, but the presidency as well. There's a lot coming up, man, that it's going to shape the face of this country for the rest of this millennium. And I don't know, John. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know I'm going to be tuned in for it and be a part of it as much as I can, because this is why we do the podcast, to talk about these issues. None of us have all of the solutions, but we can talk about it and be able to figure out how we move forward.
Absolutely. And I think, to your point, it all sort of ties in the fact that even with Trump's tweet, and anybody who tries to talk about black on black violence, they tend to go straight to Chicago. They ignore the high murder rate that's in New Orleans and other places like that. And the per capita murder rate is generally not in Chicago in terms of the top. In fact, the last time I checked last year, Chicago didn't even break top 10. But it's a great talking point for that. And nobody is really who's excoriating that situation, which it's terrible to see any sort of violence in that sense. But nobody's talking about solutions in that sense, right?
It's a red herring argument.
Yeah, absolutely. But nobody's looking at a solution for that. They're throwing it out in a sense of, let me discredit something else by pointing to the violence that is inherent in Black people, right? And so the solution that people aren't looking at is, even if Trump comes in and is like, beats his chest and throws the military around and is like, hey, here we go. Let me fix South Chicago. The moment they leave, what did they really change? Like, what really changed? To use Big Jim's comment or quote, a hungry mouth has no morals. They're going to go right back to the same exact thing, right? And so there's a point that was made by Dr. Claude Anderson when he was talking about the civil rights movement. He stated something that was really interesting that I had never thought of, and something going back to your point, Chris, about speeches and things that Dr. King said that people don't really look at. They focus on the I have a dream. Dr. King, prior to his death, was shifting from civil rights and integration to finances. And there's a lot of speculation about the point of that's why he was murdered. And so he has a famous quote that he was talking to his good friend, Harry Belafonte. And Belafonte had asked him a question, about why he seemed agitated and preoccupied. This was a few weeks before he was murdered. And he said, I've come upon something that disturbs me deeply. He said, we have fought hard and long for integration, as I believe we should have. And I know we will win, but I have come to believe that we are integrating into a burning house. I'm afraid that America has lost the moral vision she may have had. And I'm afraid that even as we integrate, we are walking into a place that does not understand that this nation needs to be deeply concerned with the plight of the poor and disenfranchised. Until we commit ourselves to ensuring that the underclass is given justice and opportunity, we will continue to perpetuate the anger and violence that tears the soul of this nation. I fear I
Man.
am integrating my people into a burning house. And so there's speculation that Dr. King, um, in his last moments, what he was really doing, he wasn't looking at integration anymore. He was like, I think we're going to win that one. But he was like, we got to start looking at the finances of this thing. And that right there is when it starts becoming a problem, because you can have your integration and those sort of things. You can walk amongst us, that sort of thing. But the power structure, the money, the assets, oh no, we can't touch that. And that right there is why reparations is such a big deal. Because if you start giving ownership, now the narrative changes. The whole concept of America changes, because it's not a white nation, quote unquote, is what many people see it as. It's not that. It's now truly a multicultural nation that's living up to what its foundation and core is supposed to be. And so the first
Right.
Constitution, the first 12 of the Constitution that existed up until the 1860s, that was not for Black America. It wasn't. We were not included in those first 12 in the Constitution. 13, 14, 15 came about to be for us, and we're not living up to that as a nation. We're not living up to that. And so in order for us to, I believe, address these issues, in order for us to deal with police brutality, in inner city crime, inner city issues, those sort of things, we need to start looking at the finances of this thing. And I'll leave you with
Absolutely, man.
with a statement from James Baldwin. He had two statements. Actually, I'll read two of his statements. It was his speech at Berkeley in 1979. And if you never watched him talk, actually, I'll link to it as well. But if you never watched him talk, he was an interesting man because he grew up in an era where being gay was an issue. But he took a lot of flack. He traveled. He was an author, those sort of things. But if you listen to him, he was a man who was comfortable in himself. And it was just so interesting to see so many of his speeches and his progression over those years. But he had a quote in this speech from Berkeley. He said, "Every white person, I don't care what he says or she says, knows one thing. They may not know, as they put it, what I want, but they know they would not like to be Black here. If they know that, they know everything they need to know." And that quote right there hits in the point of understanding that it's not an issue of educating non-Black people in America about the Black plight. You could look at it and be like, yeah, I don't, I wouldn't want to be Black in America. If you can do that, you know enough to be able to join in and join the revolution. And the last quote I'll say that he had in there was, going back to your point about the Texas education books and those sort of things. Baldwin said, how can you expect the people who can't educate their own people educate anyone else? And so we're dealing with the education of Black America, or really America in general, and the books are being written in a way that do not tell the truth about our history and whitewashes it in so many different ways. How can we expect them to educate us? And that partly is why we end up having to deal with a lot of issues of miseducation in America from all sides of the spectrum. And we just have to learn, a little bit later in life in different ways. And we have to get across these things. And we really need to start looking at the finances of this thing. And so that's what I'm going to be doing, to be honest, because I've been looking for what the solution is here. How do we get beyond the position that we're in right now? How do we move beyond, just every few years revolting in a way? How do we actually change the landscape? And I think we change this landscape by changing the finances and the assets. Chris, what you got to close us out with?
Yeah, that was beautiful, man. I mean, there's a couple of things that I'll leave you with. I'm a pretty well-read individual in terms of books and literature and trying to understand things. And I'll leave you with three things. One of the ones that is my favorite, I've read a lot of Black authors, You know, I mean, I'll give you something to go back and read here in a bit. But one of the things that I think you should all go back and do is listen to James Baldwin's Talk to Teachers. He gave it, 57 years ago. And the basis of it is for teachers on how to talk to their students during difficult times. As we all do these Zoom calls, as we all communicate with each other in different ways, it's absolutely phenomenal to me. And we didn't even touch on that because we moved right past it, but it's absolutely phenomenal to me how technology has been used to harness the spread and the relay of information immediately. There's no delay on it. It comes immediate now. But that speech was absolutely incredible. Go back and listen to it. There's another one that he had, which was a debate that he had with William Buckley. And one of the things that he said in there, and I'm not going to quote it exactly because I don't have it directly in front of me, but one of the things that he said in there was something like, he's talking about the sacrifice that African Americans have made in this country in building this country and not being able to enjoy, quote unquote, the fruits of our labor. The things that we built for other people, and we were never integrated in to be able to enjoy it. And one of the things that he says is something along the lines of, if we continue to be disenfranchised, at some point, the same individuals that built this country are pretty much going to set this country ablaze.
Yeah.
These were, while they were very, very beautifully written and orated speeches, they were very radical because they had to be very radical. And I mean, these were times when these individuals giving these speeches were being followed by FBI, that, they were being raided by DEA agents. They were being arrested. They were, the country was against them. So they maximized their time to be able to get their messages across, and it's, I think it's, again, man, it's one of the things that we don't really do in this country in terms of educating our individuals of our youth, in the school systems about what's truly happened in this country, how it was built, and whose ancestors really paid the price for it. Go back and look at Malcolm X's The Ballad of the Bullet, which he gave in 1964. This was all during the time of civil rights. The Ballad of the Bullet pretty much says exactly that. If we cannot get equal rights in this country, do you believe it's now come to the time to where it's either the ballot or the bullet. We're either going to go vote you out or we're going to take it by force. Again, a very radical speech, man. Go read Elijah Muhammad's Message to a Black Man. There's so much truth to those speeches and those books that were written, because that is our history. The history of this nation is Indian, Hispanic, and Black. There's no other ways around it. That is the basis of the history in this country. And until we teach that, and until we educate individuals who are the future of this country and give them the backbone to understand that, we will kind of always see this cycle to some extent, because there's always going to be a superiority complex. I'll tell you one of the things that you start talking about the finances of this, John, that struck me. I've been fortunate to go to the White House, and not just go to the White House, but be given a tour of the White House by a good friend of mine who is a federal judge in DC, and whose aunt was an alphabet agent. I'll just say that. I won't say who she worked for, but she gave me a tour of this. She drove us down there. She's a DC native. And, when you get east of the river, when you get to Berry Farms, when you get to Mayfair, I mean, these are extremely Black, these are extremely poor parts of DC to some extent. And then you see the White House in front of you. You see Georgetown. You see the Lincoln Memorial. You see the World War II Memorial, and you're like, that is the one thing that strikes you. Is like, here is one of the political pillars of the world right here, and it's out of reach of every single one of these people. They can't enjoy it. It's not for them.
It's not.
When you and she did that purposely. She could have probably taken me another way, but she did that purposely, because that's the type of individual that she is. And I will never forget that dynamic of that drive down to the White House and seeing that. And it's one of the things that stuck with me was they could solve all of these people's problems in one lick. They could get in here and vote on it, work with the city and solve these issues in one. I mean, DC at what, in 90, 91 was the murder capital of the world.
Across from the
You
White
realize
House.
how insane, you realize how insane that is to say that, man?
Yeah. Yep. Where they reside and make the laws was the worst place in the country for murder.
It's unbelievable. But I'll never forget that dynamic, man. And it, you know, I think you can register to go to the White House, or you can put in a letter as to, you know, wanting to go there or whatever. But if you ever get the opportunity to do it, focus on what's around you when you drive to it, because it's mind blowing, man. Maybe I'll talk to James and see if we can't all three get up there and make a trip together.
I think that'd be dope. Be able to get a
you know,
a live podcast up there. That'd be dope.
Yeah, man. I still want to go to the African American Museum. It's on my list of things to do. And, you know, I've talked to people that have went to it. And one of the women that I respect, I'm going to try to get her on the podcast. Her mom was actually one of the first Black women to graduate from the University of Michigan during the early 60s. But she and I had the talk, and she said, Chris, she's like, I've been all around the world. I've made the trip to Africa. I've spent time in Africa. She said, but seeing that museum, she was like, I'll just tell you, just be ready. Just be ready. And then she left it at that. So I want to go see it. I want to go to it. I want to experience it. And I want to see kind of, you know, what it has to offer, and what that experience is. But I'll talk to James, man, and see if he can't make a couple phone calls for us and get us back in the White House together, and we make a trip up there and experience, because it's, you know, it's one of those things that I think most people will only see in textbooks or on TV or, you know, through photos and things like that. But to experience it is something completely different. And when you get to experience that exact dynamic around you, is just, yeah, man, it's confrontational. I'll tell you that.
Absolutely, man. That's a great way to close it out there. What I'm going to do, man, is finish off with a couple Baldwin quotes here, since we were discussing that. One of Baldwin's quotes was, "The power of the white world is threatened whenever a Black man refuses to accept the white world's definitions." And that goes directly to the museum. And that's why that African American Museum is so important, because it does show things that we have never been taught. They're not shown. They're not in the history books. They do not openly discuss these things, because if they cannot define and control that narrative, then people begin to think for themselves, and people who think for themselves is a problem. No matter the race, people who think for themselves is a problem to the power structure. And the last quote, which kind of seems relevant to this time, is, "If the American Negro, the American Black man, is going to be a free person in this country, the people of this country have to give up something. If they don't give it up, it will be taken from them." And that's the threat. That's the threat, is gaining power, gaining assets, gaining that structure. That's the threat to the power of this nation. And it's flipping. It's changing. We looked at the stats earlier. The numbers are changing. The demographics are changing. This nation is no longer the same nation that many people look at it upon as being this great, powerful white nation. It is not. It never has been. But that narrative is now being disbanded. Columbus didn't discover America. That's what we've been taught, what we've been lied to about. Those sort of things, it's going to change. It's going to change. And I definitely agree. I look forward to 20 years from now when we can see that change. But it's been a great conversation, man. I definitely appreciate it. I know you're on the road today, man. You know, you can catch us now at PFA Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can also catch us at on the website, pfapodcast.com/live. I'm working on getting the live video up there, but you can catch us on YouTube now. We're working this out to actually live stream the video. So catch us out there, or check us out there. You can also get the link to the YouTube channel. Mike will be with us next week. Out next week, I'll be coming in on Sunday, and I'll be talking about my license to carry class that I'm taking on Saturday. So looking forward to that. And we'll be discussing a lot of more topics on Wednesday as well at 7 p.m. Catch us then. We're out.